Ever thought cartoons were just for children? Think again. Some animated films pushed boundaries so hard, they left kids traumatized and parents scrambling for the remote. One film got the first ever X rating for animation. Another was banned for depicting scenes too disturbing for grown-ups, let alone children. 1. Fritz the Cat. Ralph Bakshi shattered every rule in 1972 when he unleashed this feline nightmare onto unsuspecting audiences. Fritz wasn't your typical cartoon cat. He was a college dropout on a rampage through 1960s counterculture, and everything he touched turned to chaos. The film follows Fritz as he drops out of school, hooks up with various female characters, starts a race riot, and basically embodied every parent's worst nightmare about what their kids might become. Based on Robert Crumb's underground comics, this wasn't just pushing boundaries, it was obliterating them. The movie cost $700,000 and became the first animated feature to receive an X rating from the MPAA. Audiences expecting Disney-style family entertainment got graphic scenes, drug use, and Fritz's relentless pursuit of hedonistic pleasure instead. The controversy was immediate and massive. What made it even more shocking was that it worked. Fritz the Cat grossed over $90 million worldwide, proving there was a massive appetite for adult animation. Critics were split. Some called it brilliant satire, others labeled it trash. Even Crumb himself hated what Bakshi did to his character, eventually killing Fritz off in his comics out of pure spite. The film spawned a sequel that Bakshi refused to direct, and it remains one of the most profitable independent animated films ever made. No wonder parents were freaking out when kids started asking for Fritz merchandise. 2. Heavy Traffic. Bakshi wasn't done shocking audiences. 2 years later, he dropped Heavy Traffic, a brutal urban nightmare that made Fritz look like Saturday morning television. This wasn't just controversial, it was a full frontal assault on everything wholesome about animation. The story follows Michael, an aspiring cartoonist trapped in a decaying New York apartment with his dysfunctional family, as he navigates the seediest corners of urban life. The film mixed live-action backgrounds with animation in ways that felt genuinely unsettling. Real photographs of poverty-stricken neighborhoods served as backdrops for animated characters dealing with domestic violence, crime, and urban decay. Bakshi recorded actual conversations in Harlem bars and integrated them into the film, creating an authenticity that made viewers deeply uncomfortable. Heavy Traffic received an X rating like its predecessor, but theaters were more willing to show it after Fritz's financial success. The movie became Bakshi's biggest critical success, with Newsweek praising its black humor, powerful grotesquerie, and peculiar raw beauty. Roger Greenspun of the New York Times called it a significant development in Bakshi's artistic vision. But parents' groups were horrified by the realistic depiction of urban violence and the film's uncompromising cynicism. Canada banned it in Alberta, and many American cities restricted its distribution. The film's legacy lies in proving animation could tackle serious adult themes without losing its artistic impact. 3. Watership Down. Martin Rosen's 1978 adaptation of Richard Adams' novel looked like a children's film about cute bunnies. Parents took their kids expecting another Disney-style animal adventure. Instead, they got a blood-soaked epic about rabbit genocide that left theaters full of traumatized children and furious parents demanding refunds. The story follows a group of rabbits fleeing their warren after Fiverr has visions of its destruction. What follows is a harrowing journey through a landscape where death lurks around every corner. Rabbits get caught in snares, their necks snapping audibly. Blood pools beneath dying characters. The villainous General Woundwort runs a fascist warren that resembles a concentration camp, complete with propaganda and brutal enforcement. Despite being rated U for Universal in the UK, Watership Down became notorious for traumatizing children. When Channel 5 aired it on Easter Sunday in 2016, parents exploded on social media. One angry tweet read, "Who thought it was a good idea to put Watership Down on Easter Sunday? Hey kids, let's watch Dead Easter Bunnies." The film's mythology begins with the god Frith punishing rabbits for their arrogance, creating a world where they're constantly hunted by predators. The Black Rabbit of Inlay serves as a grim reaper figure, collecting rabbit souls for the afterlife. Roger Ebert's site later described it as having frank depictions of cruelty and oppression, and an obsession with death that pervades every scene. The film's influence on an entire generation cannot be overstated. It taught kids that animated movies could be genuinely frightening, and that cute characters weren't safe from horrible fates. 4. Wizards Bakshi's 1970s fantasy epic seemed perfect for families. Wizards, magic, colorful fairy folk fighting against evil. Parents assumed it would be harmless fantasy fun. They were wrong. Wizards turned out to be a post-apocalyptic nightmare filled with Nazi imagery that left kids confused and parents outraged about what they had accidentally exposed their children to. The story follows Avatar, a good wizard, battling his evil brother, Black Wolf, who discovers ancient Nazi propaganda films and uses them to rally mutant armies. The film literally features footage from World War II documentaries, showing actual Nazi soldiers marching alongside animated demons. Black Wolf's army uses swastikas as symbols, and his rallies deliberately echo Nuremberg gatherings from the Third Reich. What made parents particularly angry was how the film mixed serious historical atrocities with cartoon fantasy. One moment, kids were watching cute fairy folk dancing in magical forests. The next, they were seeing tanks rolling through battlefields, while Nazi propaganda played in the background. The movie earned a PG rating, but 1970s PG was far more permissive than today's standards. The film cost around $1.2 million and made modest profits, but the real controversy came from parents who felt deceived by the marketing. 20th Century Fox promoted it as family entertainment, completely downplaying the dark historical themes. Critics were divided. Some praised Bakshi's ambitious blend of fantasy and political commentary. Others called it confused and inappropriate for children. The movie remains a cult classic, but it effectively ended Bakshi's attempts to make family-friendly films. 5. The Secret of NIMH. Don Bluth's 1982 departure from Disney looked like typical family fare, a mother mouse trying to save her sick child. Instead, audiences got a genuinely dark tale about animal experimentation, deadly machinery, and characters facing real consequences for their actions. This wasn't Disney's sanitized version of nature. It was brutal, unforgiving, and psychologically intense. Mrs. Brisby must move her family before the farmer's plow destroys their home. But her son Timothy is too sick to travel. Her quest leads her to the rats of NIMH, laboratory animals who escaped after being subjected to intelligence-enhancing experiments. The film doesn't shy away from the horror of what these animals endured in the labs. And the rats' enhanced intelligence comes with a profound existential crisis about their place in the world. The movie's violence was shockingly realistic for a children's film. Characters actually died on screen, sometimes brutally. The villain Jenner murders Nicodemus by crushing him with a concrete block, and his death is shown in graphic detail. Dragon the Cat poses a constant threat, nearly killing Mrs. Brisby multiple times. The final battle between Jenner and Justin is genuinely vicious, with both characters trying to kill each other. Parents were unprepared for the film's emotional intensity and mature themes. Kids left theaters asking difficult questions about animal testing, death, and why bad things happen to good people. The movie earned modest box office returns, but gained a massive cult following on home video. Bluth's commitment to treating children as intelligent audiences capable of handling complex emotions set a new standard for animated storytelling, but it also sparked debates about how much darkness was appropriate in children's entertainment. 6. Coonskin Bakshi's most controversial film makes his other work look tame by comparison. Originally titled Harlem Nights, this 1975 urban satire used intentionally racist imagery to attack American racism. But most audiences couldn't see past the horrifying caricatures to understand Bakshi's actual message. The result was protests, bans, and one of the most inflammatory animated films ever created. The story reimagines Uncle Remus folktales as a modern crime saga following Brother Rabbit, Brother Bear, and Preacher Fox as they rise through Harlem's criminal underworld. Bakshi deliberately used every racist stereotype imaginable: blackface imagery, exaggerated features, offensive characterizations, to create a satirical mirror of American racism. His goal was to expose the ugliness of these stereotypes by showing them in their full, undisguised horror. The Congress of Racial Equality protested the film before it was even released, staging demonstrations and smoke bomb attacks at screenings. Paramount Pictures dropped the film immediately, forcing Bakshi to find alternative distribution. The movie was banned in multiple cities and received extremely limited release. Even Al Sharpton, then a young activist, joined the protests against it. What made the controversy even more complex was that the NAACP actually supported the film, calling it a difficult satire that effectively criticized racism. Black animators worked on the production, and many understood Bakshi's satirical intent. But the imagery was so shocking that most audiences couldn't get past the surface to see the deeper critique. Critics later called it everything from racist trash to a masterpiece of satirical filmmaking. Bakshi himself considers it his best work, but it remains virtually unseen due to its inflammatory content. 7. American Pop. Bakshi's 1981 epic chronicled 4 generations of a Russian Jewish immigrant family pursuing the American dream through music. On paper, it sounded like wholesome family entertainment about the evolution of American popular music. In practice, it was a brutal examination of how the entertainment industry chews up and destroys artists, complete with graphic violence, substance abuse, and crushing disappointment. The film follows the family from the early 1900s through the birth of punk rock, showing how each generation struggles to find success in increasingly corrupt and violent music industry. The rotoscoped animation gave everything an eerie, dreamlike quality that made the violence feel uncomfortably real. Characters die from war, overdoses, and gang violence. The American dream becomes a nightmare that destroys more lives than it rewards. What shocked parents was how the film treated music, something typically associated with joy and celebration, as a source of pain and exploitation. Each generation faces betrayal, addiction, or death in pursuit of success. The movie's depiction of the music industry as controlled by organized crime and corrupt businessmen was particularly disturbing to audiences expecting a celebration of American culture. The film received an R rating and limited distribution, but parents still brought children expecting an educational journey through American music history. Instead, they got graphic depictions of World War I battlefields, drug deals gone wrong, and the brutal reality of artistic ambition in a capitalist system. Critics praised the film's ambitious scope and visual innovation, but audiences were largely put off by its unrelenting cynicism. The movie has gained recognition as one of Bakshi's most mature works, but it remains too dark for most family viewing. 8. The Lord of the Rings. Bakshi's 1978 adaptation of Tolkien's epic seemed like perfect family fantasy entertainment. Parents expected sword and sorcery adventure, suitable for all ages. Instead, they got a genuinely frightening film that used rotoscoping technology to create some of the most disturbing imagery ever put in an animated film. The Black Riders alone gave kids nightmares for years. The movie follows Frodo's journey to destroy the One Ring, but Bakshi's vision was far darker than most expectations. The rotoscoping technique, where live-action footage was traced over to create animation, resulted in characters that moved in uncanny, unsettling ways. The Black Riders appeared as writhing, shadowy forms that seemed to exist between life and death. Battle scenes were genuinely violent, with graphic depictions of warfare that felt more realistic than typical animated fare. What made parents particularly angry was the film's abrupt ending. United Artists marketed it as The Lord of the Rings, without indicating it was only the first part of a planned trilogy. Audiences sat through 2.5 hours of dark fantasy adventure, expecting resolution, only to have the story stop mid-narrative. Kids left theaters confused and scared, parents felt cheated, and Bakshi never got to complete his vision. The film earned back its $8 million budget and more, but fan reaction was largely hostile. Tolkien enthusiasts felt betrayed by the cheap-looking effects and missing conclusion. The movie received mixed critical reviews, with many praising Bakshi's ambitious vision, while criticizing the execution. Despite its flaws, the film introduced many viewers to Tolkien's work and demonstrated that animated fantasy could be genuinely epic in scope. Its influence on later fantasy animation cannot be overstated, even if most remember it more for its problems than its achievements. 9. The Plague Dogs. Martin Rosen followed up Watership Down with an even darker tale about 2 dogs who escape from an animal testing laboratory. If parents thought his rabbit film was traumatic, this 1982 adaptation of Richard Adams' novel pushed animal suffering to genuinely unbearable levels. The movie was so disturbing that many countries refused to release it theatrically. The story follows Roef and Snitter, laboratory animals who break free after being subjected to horrific experiments. Snitter has had his brain surgically altered, causing hallucinations and personality changes. Roef has been repeatedly drowned and revived in endurance tests. Their escape into the wild becomes a desperate struggle for survival, as they're hunted by both humans and their own psychological trauma. The film's depiction of animal experimentation was unflinchingly realistic. Laboratory scenes showed dogs being tortured in the name of science, with detailed animation of medical procedures and animal suffering. Even after escaping, the dogs face starvation, violence from farmers, and the constant threat of recapture. The movie's tone was unrelentingly bleak, offering little hope or comfort for its protagonists. Parents who took children expecting another animated animal adventure instead got a graphic examination of animal cruelty that left kids traumatized and adults questioning what they had just witnessed. The film received limited theatrical release in the United States, with several scenes cut to reduce the graphic content. Many countries banned it entirely or restricted it to adult audiences only. Critics praised the film's emotional power and important message about animal rights, but most agreed it was far too intense for children. The movie remains one of the most psychologically brutal animated films ever made. 10. Fire and Ice. Ralph Bakshi's 1983 sword and sorcery epic looked like fantasy adventure fun, but underneath the barbarian action lay themes of fascism, environmental destruction, and graphic violence that made parents extremely uncomfortable. The film combined fantasy elements with dark political allegory in ways that confused and disturbed young audiences. The story follows Princess Tigra's kidnapping by the evil Ice Lord Necron, setting up what seems like a typical rescue adventure. But Bakshi filled the narrative with fascist imagery, environmental destruction, and surprisingly graphic violence. Necron's Ice Kingdom expands across the world, destroying everything in its path, a clear allegory for industrial pollution and totalitarian expansion that went over most children's heads. The film's violence was particularly shocking for an animated fantasy. Characters died brutally on screen, often in ways that emphasized their suffering. The movie's female characters were designed with exaggerated physical attributes that made parents uncomfortable with their children watching. Princess Tigra spends most of the film in revealing outfits that bordered on inappropriate for family viewing. What really disturbed audiences was the film's visual style. Bakshi used rotoscoping to create hyper-realistic character movement, but the technique made everything feel slightly off and unsettling. The combination of realistic violence with fantasy elements created a tone that was neither fully serious nor appropriately playful for children. The movie earned a PG rating, but pushed the boundaries of what that meant in the early 1980s. Critics were largely dismissive, calling the film a shallow exercise in style over substance. Audiences stayed away, making it one of Bakshi's least successful theatrical releases. However, the film gained a cult following on home video, where its striking visual design and Frank Frazetta-inspired artwork attracted fans of fantasy art and animation. 11. The Black Cauldron. Disney's 1985 adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's fantasy novels was supposed to mark the studio's triumphant return to epic storytelling. Instead, it became Disney's most controversial animated film, earning the studio's first PG rating and traumatizing children across America. The movie's dark tone and graphic imagery shocked parents who expected typical Disney magic. The story follows Taran, a young pig keeper who must prevent the evil horned king from obtaining the Black Cauldron and raising an army of undead warriors. But Disney's version was far darker than their usual fare, featuring genuinely frightening villain designs, graphic transformation sequences, and themes of death and resurrection that seemed inappropriate for children. The horned king himself was a nightmare figure, a skeletal sorcerer whose very presence seemed to drain life from everything around him. His plan to raise an army of undead cauldron-born warriors led to scenes of corpses rising from their graves and marching as mindless soldiers. The transformation sequences were particularly disturbing, showing characters being consumed by dark magic in graphic detail. What made parents particularly angry was how the film subverted Disney's established brand. Children expected singing animals and happy endings, instead getting a medieval horror story where main characters faced real danger and death. The movie's violence was unprecedented for Disney, with characters falling into bottomless chasms and being threatened with graphic torture. The film cost $44 million to produce but earned only $21 million domestically, making it one of Disney's biggest financial disasters. Critics called it too dark for children and too simplistic for adults. The movie's failure led Disney to retreat from dark fantasy for decades, returning to more traditional fairy tale adaptations. Jeffrey Katzenberg famously ordered cuts to reduce the violence, but the damage was done. The Black Cauldron had proven that audiences weren't ready for genuinely dark Disney animation. 12. Cool World Bakshi's 1992 return to feature animation was originally conceived as the first animated horror film, blending live action with animation in a story about interdimensional travel between reality and a cartoon universe. Paramount Pictures completely rewrote the concept during production, turning it into a confused mess that satisfied no one and effectively ended Bakshi's theatrical career. The final film follows Jack Deebs, creator of the Cool World comic book, who gets transported into his own creation where cartoons and humans coexist. But the movie's mixing of live-action actors with animated characters created deeply unsettling imagery that made viewers uncomfortable. The cartoon world was filled with bizarre, often disturbing character designs that seemed to exist in a constant state of barely contained chaos. What made parents particularly disturbed was the film's strong, suggestive content, disguised as cartoon fun. The character of Hollywood was designed as an overtly provocative cartoon who seduces the human protagonist, leading to scenes that push the boundaries of what was acceptable in mainstream animation. The movie's PG-13 rating didn't adequately prepare families for how genuinely weird and inappropriate much of the content was. Bakshi disowned the final film, claiming Paramount had completely destroyed his original vision. The studio wanted a Roger Rabbit-style family comedy, while Bakshi intended to create an adult-oriented horror film. The resulting compromise pleased no one, too weird for mainstream audiences, too sanitized for Bakshi fans, and too confusing for children who expected traditional animation. The movie was a massive financial and critical failure, grossing only $5.8 million against its $30 million budget. Critics savaged it as an incoherent mess, and audiences stayed away in droves. The failure convinced Bakshi to leave theatrical animation for good, focusing instead on television work and fine art. Cool World remains a fascinating failure, a glimpse of what might have been if Bakshi had been allowed to complete his original vision. 13. Akira Katsuhiro. Otomo's 1988 cyberpunk masterpiece introduced Western audiences to the possibilities of adult animation, but its extreme violence and disturbing imagery left many parents wishing they'd never heard of anime. The film's influence on animation cannot be overstated, but its content was absolutely not appropriate for children, despite being a cartoon. Set in post-apocalyptic Neo-Tokyo, the story follows Kaneda and Tetsuo, teenage bikers caught up in a government conspiracy involving psychic children and devastating supernatural powers. But the film's depiction of violence was unlike anything Western audiences had seen in animation. Bodies exploded in graphic detail, characters were crushed by psychic forces, and the destruction of Tokyo was rendered with terrifying realism. What shocked parents most was how the film treated its teenage protagonists. These weren't wholesome cartoon heroes, but genuinely troubled kids involved in gang violence, government corruption, and cosmic horror. Tetsuo's transformation from weakling to psychic monster was depicted as both empowering and horrifying, showing his body mutating in disturbing ways as his powers grew beyond control. The movie's violence was particularly graphic during Tetsuo's final transformation, where his psychic powers cause his body to expand into a writhing mass of flesh that consumes everything in its path. The sequence was genuinely nightmarish, combining body horror with existential terror in ways that traumatized viewers expecting typical animated entertainment. Despite its R rating, many parents brought children thinking animation was inherently kid-friendly. The cultural impact was immediate and massive. Akira proved that animation could handle serious science fiction, themes, and adult content. But it also sparked debates about animation's role in entertainment and whether cartoons should ever contain such graphic material. The film's success opened the door for more adult-oriented animation in the West, fundamentally changing how audiences viewed the medium. 14. Heavy Metal. This 1981 anthology film adapted stories from the underground comic magazine, promising science fiction adventure suitable for teenagers. Instead, audiences got an R-rated collection of violent, often misogynistic stories that combined graphic violence with explicit content in ways that shocked mainstream viewers expecting animated science fiction fun. The film presents multiple stories connected by the malevolent Loch Nar, a glowing green orb that corrupts everything it touches. Each segment escalates in violence and inappropriate content, from warriors battling monsters to post-apocalyptic adventures filled with graphic imagery. The movie's approach to female characters was particularly problematic, often depicting women as either victims or overly emphasized characters designed for male fantasy. What made parents especially angry was how the film was marketed to teenagers despite its extreme content. The movie poster and advertising emphasized the science fiction and fantasy elements while downplaying the graphic violence and adult themes. Many parents brought older children expecting something like Star Wars, instead getting explicit content that made them extremely uncomfortable. The Den segment, in particular, featured graphic violence and adult situations that seemed designed specifically to shock audiences. Characters died in brutal ways, often for comedic effect, and the movie's tone shifted wildly between dark humor and genuine horror. The animation quality varied dramatically between segments, with some featuring impressive artistry, while others looked cheap and rushed. Critics were largely dismissive, calling the film juvenile and offensive. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars, writing that it was all flash and style and no substance. The movie earned modest box office returns but gained a cult following on home video, where its anthology format and rock soundtrack found an appreciative audience among fans of underground comics and metal music. 15. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. This 1974 sequel attempted to cash in on the success of Bakshi's original Fritz the Cat, but without Bakshi's involvement or Robert Crumb's approval, the result was a confused, often offensive mess that pushed boundaries for their own sake, rather than making any meaningful satirical points about society or culture. The movie presents 9 different scenarios showing what Fritz's life might have been like, ranging from his experiences as a college radical to his adventures as a space traveler. But without Bakshi's satirical edge or Crumb's underground comic sensibility, the stories became exercises in juvenile shock value rather than meaningful social commentary. What made the film particularly disturbing was how it amplified the worst aspects of the original without any of its redeeming qualities. The movie featured graphic content and offensive stereotypes without the satirical context that gave the first film its artistic legitimacy. Parents who had managed to understand or tolerate the original, Fritz found this sequel completely indefensible. The animation quality was noticeably inferior to Bakshi's work, with cheaper production values and less creative visual storytelling. Many scenes felt like excuses to show inappropriate content rather than serving any narrative purpose. The movie's episodic structure meant there was no character development or thematic coherence to justify its extreme content. Critics universally panned the film, and it performed poorly at the box office. Even fans of the original Fritz the Cat largely rejected it as an inferior cash grab. The movie's failure effectively killed any possibility of further Fritz sequels and demonstrated that pushing boundaries without artistic purpose produces nothing but offensive garbage. It remains a cautionary tale about what happens when controversial content loses its satirical intent and becomes mere exploitation. These films prove animation isn't always innocent fun. Sometimes it's genuinely disturbing art that pushes every boundary imaginable. Each movie on this list sparked outrage, traumatized children, or challenged what audiences thought cartoons could be. Which of these controversial animated films shocked you the most? Did any of them actually improve animation as an art form? Or did they go too far in their quest to be adult-oriented? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which banned or controversial animated film you think deserves to be rediscovered. Are there any boundaries that animation should never cross? Or is everything fair game in the name of artistic expression?